If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like, as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. Now, that said, family, this is going to be an unpleasant conversation for some of you, because what I'm saying pertains to a number of you. But this is a discussion that doesn't get mentioned anywhere near as much as it should, and it's been put off for far too long. We need to talk about the black community and drugs, particularly marijuana, though this applies to heroin, crack, and other sorts of intoxicants that black people have decided that they're going to imbibe. Now, because too many times we make excuses for black folks who are doing the wrong thing, there's a lot of you who are going to try to hide from that. You're going to try to hide behind that. The black folks keep giving cover and shelter to Negroes who are doing wrong, but you're going to be finding that doesn't work here. Under white supremacy, we've picked up a number of bad habits. Most all of them were foisted upon us. Very few of our bad habits did we actually come upon honestly. Most of them were the result of the fact that we have not had control of our own lives in half a millennium. But that doesn't change the fact that just because we are under oppression, that we hold on to anything that white supremacy has saddled us with. Because for us to do so is for us to also refuse to take upon ourselves the responsibilities that power demands. The name of this Thursday evening address is Get High or Get Free. You cannot have both. Show me the group of people who are strung out, turned up, and powerful. Show me the people who make it a point that they're going to stay inebriated, stay intoxicated, and who will also stay in control. You can't find it because it don't work that way. Sure, you can find a few outliers who, in spite of themselves, managed through just dumb luck to get their hands on some money. But these ain't the ones who run things. And by the way, isn't it interesting how inevitably these people who just so happen to get their hands on a little bit of cash, even though in spite of their drug addiction, notice how they always lose it? You notice how one follows the other? But returning to my first point, this is not about individuals. You're not going to conquer white supremacy as an individual. You will not gain black empowerment as an individual. It's what happens at the group level that determines whether or not white supremacy will die or whether or not our people will. And as a group, have you ever seen anybody on this planet as a group? You see that everybody from the butcher, the baker, to the candlestick maker is strung out, and yet that group is powerful. You won't find it. Because intoxicated and empowered is a contradiction. For you to be intoxicated or high is a loss of control. Power is total control, and the two don't mix. Now, if there's any one thing that drug addiction should teach to black folks, it's that what's true for the individual is also true for the group. You see, whenever somebody's strung out and addicted, you ask them whether or not they're an addict, and what's the first thing they're going to say? No, of course not. Not me. No, sir, not me. No, I only drink to wind down. I only get high so that I can wind down, let my hair down. I'm certainly not addicted. Sure, I do it every day without ceasing. It's absolutely a religious tradition for me. I'm doing it every freaking day. You can set your watch to me, but that doesn't mean that I'm addicted, mind you. It's just something that I like to do. See, the addict always has some sort of easy deflection or some sort of asinine rationalization that they try to use, and they always try to turn their addiction into some sort of virtue. That's the first thing that the addict tries to do. They try to make it where their addiction is somehow virtuous on some level. And isn't that what black folks have tried to do regarding drugs, especially marijuana? You got Negroes who are silly enough to actually try the lie and say, why, we was getting high in Africa. Black folks are always trying to figure out some way to link some sort of wrongdoing or some sort of asinine behavior to Africa. My personal favorite is saying that black folks, we had tattoos. Oh, we was tattooing ourselves in Africa. Actually, no. Scarification is a form of African body art, but not tattoos. But it just goes to show black folks are trying to take all of this effery that we picked up here in the hells of America under white supremacy and trying to find a way to give it, to cleanse it, to sanitize it by giving it some sort of flimsy veneer of African heritage. Talk about trying to make a saint out of a sinner. Talk about sprinkling sugar on crap. But this is the lengths that people will go to, and the lengths that groups of people who are doing wrong will go to. Just so they don't have to admit that they're doing wrong and just so they don't have to stop doing it. As human beings, we are creatures of habit. It is one of our greatest strengths, but it's also I would say that it is our greatest liability. It's certainly our greatest weakness. Because once somebody has picked up a bad habit or had a bad habit forced on them, and you can indeed have bad habits forced upon you, then what happens is that becomes part of who you are. And what is addiction if not a compulsive habit? A habit you are utterly compelled to have to go through no matter what. You have to carry it out every single time. It's just compulsive. See, the thing about addiction is you can't really get rid of an addiction per se. Once that becomes part of you, the only way to free yourself from it is you have to replace the addiction with something else. Think of it like a computer hard drive. You have to overwrite it with something else. Notice the wording I use. I didn't say override. I said overwrite. You have to write something in its place. Once addiction takes hold of you, that addiction becomes your primary personality. That becomes who you are. The addiction does the talking and the acting for you. You're living a lie because you have surrendered a part of your soul. That's what addiction requires of you. You ever see the movie The Godfather where you got the Italians sitting around talking about drugs and they're saying, whatever you do, no drugs. We ain't doing no drugs around here. Okay, well, we'll sell drugs, but you don't sell drugs in our community. Go up to Harlem where the niggers are at. Let them lose their souls. Mario Puzo knew exactly what he was writing when he put that in his screenplay. So consider that just an elaborate way for Professor Truth to tell you, I don't want to hear any of your bullcrap excuses for why it is that you're a junkie. That's what you are. That's the reality. You ain't gotta like it, but I am called Professor Black Truth for a reason. It ain't Professor Black Cushion the Blow or Professor Black Dance Around the Subject. I come straight up the middle. And while you can claim that the white media certainly glorified drug abuse in the black community, what you cannot say is that anybody told you that there is anything virtuous about it. A lot of black folks have been looking for some way to hide from white supremacy, and true, there are some who understand that white supremacy is excruciating for us. It hurts to be oppressed. It hurts to be robbed of spirit. It hurts to have your soul ground into the dust and the dirt every day. But until we understand that we are stronger than our oppressors, and until we lose our fear of exerting that strength, then I don't give a damn how much you get high. The only thing you're doing is you're trying to anesthetize yourself on your way to the grave. It's no accident that some of the biggest rappers and hip hoppers and idiots that you see out there bragging about drug abuse, these are also the main ones who have made common cause with white supremacy. That's no coincidence. The two go hand in hand. I mean, after all, who do you think gave these guys their drugs to get high with in the first place? Now, I've explained what it is that addiction and drug abuse, and we're focusing on marijuana use in specific, though this could apply to other drugs that black folks use. But let's just go ahead and stick with marijuana, because that's the one that black people try to defend the use of the most. Oh, it's just a plant. Really, just out of curiosity, you ever seen a Negro who's addicted to apples or celery? Get the hell out of here with that crap. I'd like to know, how many rutabagas do you have to eat before you get addicted to them? I'm just saying. All right, so we've gone ahead and touched upon what marijuana abuse in the black community means to black folks, but what does it mean to the white supremacists? Why this in particular? Because under white supremacy, everything the white supremacist lays his hands or eyes upon, he attempts to weaponize for his power. Do you think that he supplied you with drugs because he likes you? Malcolm told you about this 50 years ago. He said the only reason you can get your hands on liquor is because the white supremacists want you to. Every time you break that seal on a liquor bottle, it's a government seal that you're breaking. Because if he didn't want you to have any liquor or in that marijuana, you wouldn't be able to get it if he didn't want you to have it. Black folks, they thought that Malcolm gave a good speech, but they didn't listen to what he said. Or rather, they listened to it and pretended as if, oh, that's just them over there. When I get drunk, that's different. I ain't really getting drunk. I'm just unwinding. So that's the reason why, under the Nation of Islam, one of the things that they demand is you got to free yourself from all of these bad habits that white supremacy tried to saddle you with. The drinking, the smoking, the drugs, white women, all these things that white supremacy has told you need to indulge in, you got to free yourself from them so you can think clearly and so that you can move for your power. Because as long as you're holding on to these vices, and there's a reason why they call them vices because they're chains, what's going to happen is you're going to be trying to find a way to preserve these little bastions of white supremacy. That's like a slave running away from a plantation, but demanding that he still hold on to the shackles. I want to stay shackled. I want to keep these leg irons on. I just don't want to be under Mass's whip. Well, until you get those shackles off, you ain't free, brother. No, this is different. This is different. No, it's not. You see, using drugs in order to undermine those who white supremacy has in its crosshairs, this is not a new strategy at all. In fact, it's quite old. You can go all the way back to the Opium Wars in the 19th century. Little history lesson on that one. In the 1700s, the Europeans had begun what they called trade with China, but it wasn't really trade. It was mostly them getting stuff from China. That's one of the lies the European tells. He tries to make up these lies that, oh, we were trading with other countries. The hell they were. They didn't have anything that the other countries wanted. Everything the European tried to bring, the other country was like, you guys are a bunch of cavemen. It's one of the lies. They were taking things out of China, things like apples, oranges, even pasta. That is not the Italians who did that. It was the Chinese who they got the idea from. The first working clocks, the first real paper, and of course, gunpowder. These are the things the Europeans got out of Asia. They didn't bring anything to Asia, but they lie and try to make it sound like the couple of little baubles and such, some of the little junk that they brought. They were trying to make it sound like, oh, this was trade. This was trade. No, it was not. The Europeans were a doggone charity case. But of course, no good deed goes unpunished. So in the 1830s, the British had a real big problem. You see, the Brits loved tea. They picked up their taste for tea from India when they conquered them, but they really got a taste of some good high-grade black tea when they got to China. In fact, the British loved Chinese tea so much that within a few years, tea imports from China constituted almost 10% of the British government's economic activity. That's how much the Brits love tea. You see that whole idea of tea drinking, that's not even something the Europeans had themselves. They picked it up as part of getting out of their little ice box following the end of the Moorish occupation. That was part of what they picked up. When they got to actually go out into the world, they did very little on their own. Practically everything they have, they picked up from everybody else, and they turn around later and lied about it and claim we were trading with people when they weren't. Or they, in the case of tea, they just don't mention, oh yeah, we didn't even know what the hell tea was. Hell, we didn't even have cups or saucers to drink off of. That's why they call it fine china. All the stuff that they got from outside the European world, but I digress. But the Brits had a big problem, though, with all of this tea importation on a massive scale, because what it did was it created a colossal trade imbalance. You had all of this British sterling silver that was going to the Chinese, and the Chinese were giving them tea, which basically is not something that's permanent. It's like any other form of consumption. It's only temporary. And then you got to go back to the source and get some more. This made China very rich, and it was also making Britain increasingly poor. So the British decided something has to be done about this trade deficit that we got. Because after all, as Jason Black explained to you, the power of white supremacy is based on the strength of its economy. This is what started the Opium Wars. The British realized that they had nothing that the Chinese needed and absolutely nothing that the Chinese wanted. So how do you deal with a trade imbalance when you don't have anything that the other party wants? Well, you have to try to induce them to want something. If you can saddle them with some sort of addiction. So the British went to India, which was one of their colonies, and they got opium. And they started handing the opium off to British and American smugglers who would bring the opium illegally into China. Now, the Chinese made it very clear that they were not cool with the idea of flooding them with opium. They punished the use of opium. They also made it very clear you get caught with the stuff, you're going to be punished. So the Chinese were not fine with it at all. They were wondering, who the hell's bringing in all this damn opium? Because people were getting strung out by the millions. But the Brits were fine with it, because the proceeds from all of this drug money was making it where that trade imbalance was starting to become more level. You see, the world's first narco state wasn't Colombia, it was Britain. And it was opium that they used as their narcotic of choice, because there was also another reason the Brits were flooding the Chinese with opium. It was to soften the Chinese up for invasion, because that was also on the table too. Now, the Chinese were being told by their British trading partners, I say that with all due sarcasm, they were being told, well, you know what, if this opium thing is such a big problem for you guys, maybe you should legalize it. Because the only thing the British were thinking about was how much money they were going to make because they monopolized the source of opium. That was something that they had a monopoly on. So, of course, if the Chinese were so stupid as to legalize opium, well, hell, that meant you were giving a monopoly on the trade to the whites, to the Europeans. And that would work out very well for the Europeans, but it wouldn't be in the Chinese's interest at all. So the Chinese emperor told them, hell no, we ain't legalizing nothing. And you guys better not leave that little Canton island that you guys are on that we got you stuck at. Y'all better not get no ideas about trying to circulate throughout the land. Don't even think about it. You got your little trade outpost and that's all you need. But the Chinese emperor decided something still had to be done about all of this uncontained drug activity, so he sent his men to stop the opium trade at the source, that's the coastal city of Canton, and what they did was they destroyed some of the warehouses that contained the opium the Europeans had stockpiled. And to give you an idea of how massive the Europeans' drug operation was, the Chinese destroyed an estimated 1,400 tons of opium during this action. Think about that. This is in the day before super tankers, and these guys are destroying opium by the tons, thousands of tons. That's how much the Brits were smuggling in. Now, the Chinese made it very clear to the Brits, hey, you got to stop it with all this pushing this opium in here. This better stop. They wrote a letter to the Queen and everything. You can probably guess how receptive she was to that. So one night, some British sailors got drunk and rowdy. Just goes to show these guys haven't changed in 180 years. The same kind of sloppy drunk behavior you see from Brits, whether it be in Japan or whether it be in Africa or whether it be wherever, where these whatever these white supremacists go, they bring that sloppy behavior with them. So it ain't new. It ain't something they picked up from MTV. It's always been this way. But you had some British sailors who decided to get drunk, and two of those sailors beat a Chinese citizen to death. The British paid the family of the deceased a quickie little tidy settlement and decided to walk away, but the Chinese government said, nah, those two killers, we want them turned over to us so they can face punishment at our hands. The British said, hell no, these are white men we're talking about here. Just because they killed one of you Chinese, that don't mean a damn thing to us. We're not turning anybody over. The Chinese continued to demand that the killers be handed over, and the British kept refusing. In the end, as a way what they hoped would placate the Chinese, the British held a mock trial on board one of their warships. And they invited the Chinese to observe, but mostly it was to taunt them. Because the sentence that the killers got was they were ordered to pay a fine and they would get a few years hard labor. By the way, that sentence would be overturned by a British court when the killers got back home. But even before that, the Chinese made it very clear your sentence ain't satisfactory. By the way, yes, I am bringing up this racial assault in order to make the point that what we're seeing today is not new. It's not some sort of fluke. It ain't some sort of coincidence. This is standard operating procedure for the white supremacists. Wherever they go, whomever they meet, this is just what they do. So you had the Brits in the middle of saying, well, we need to be legalizing this opium in y'all's land, don't you think? See, the Brits were not about to legalize opium in Britain. They were not about to legalize it there, but they would go to the Chinese and tell them, you need to legalize it. So what did the Chinese do as a response to this injustice? Seeing some white supremacists who killed a Chinese citizen, the Brits say, well, we're not going to punish him. And we want him to be beyond your reach. So what did the Chinese do? What was their response? The Chinese government retaliated. They blockaded the Pearl River, which the Brits used to move their illegal and occasionally legal goods into and out of China, which basically meant the Brits were shut out. They put in place a blockade is what the Chinese did. They didn't march. They didn't chant. They didn't try to appeal to the European sense of decency. That little old settlement check that the Brits gave, that didn't pacify the Chinese. They didn't look and say, well, as long as I get paid off, as long as y'all break me off something. And they weren't talking any forgive crap. They told the Brits, you can keep your little old check, and we ain't forgiving nothing. The Chinese wanted the killers punished to their satisfaction, not the Europeans. So what the Chinese did was they collectively punished the Europeans who were there in Canton. They ordered that the Chinese people were not to do any sort of business with the British that involved food. This was to effectively starve them, which they did. They started putting some pain on them, said, you're not, they ordered them to it. They found a couple of Chinese who either had soft hearts or soft brains, decided, hey, what harm would it do? They said, you know what, we're going to keep an eye on everybody here to make sure y'all ain't trying to slip these guys any doggone honey buns or anything else. We'll see their stomachs touch their backbones before we let up on them. This blockade is to put some pain on them. That's what the Chinese did. Oh, by the way, the Chinese also spread the rumor that the local stream that the foreigners typically use to get their fresh water from, they spread the rumor that they had poisoned the water. Yeah, no food, no water. That's what they did to the white supremacists after the white supremacists harmed one of their people. No forgiveness, no marching, no chanting. They said, you know what? We're going to put some pain on them ourselves. We're not going to be relying on any European white supremacist court because we already know what these bastards are about. So we're just going to go ahead and do it ourselves because power is not given, it is taken. Now, to make a long story short, this eventually led to the British and the Chinese having a war in regards to basically trade. This was about who was going to be in charge there as far as which direction the money was going to flow. And before hostilities broke out, the British foreign minister instructed his functionaries to get the Chinese to concede to giving them an island that the British could use as an outpost. They did not want something, they didn't want to be simply told, we'll allow you to be here. They said, no, get the Chinese to agree that they're going to wholesale give us an island. They didn't say sell an island. They said, tell them that they need to go ahead and choose an island that we're going to have as sovereign British territory. Keep in mind, this was 2 years before the Brits would take Hong Kong during the Opium Wars. So you see the plan by the British to seize a piece of Chinese real estate that they would use as an outpost to basically run China by remote control. That wasn't some spontaneous event. It was the British's plan all along. That way, no matter what the Chinese government thought or said, the Brits would always have a piece of real estate very, very close by that the Chinese would not be able to shut them out of because they would own it. That was part of the demands that the British were making before hostilities broke out. This isn't something that came up during the war. This is what they were talking about in the months leading up to the war. You guys need to give us some land. Hand it to us. Anyway, to make a long story short, the Opium Wars basically ended with the Europeans eventually prevailing. And part of what the British wanted was they wanted for the Chinese to eventually concede to making opium legal. Now, the Chinese were willing to make some concessions. Y'all want Hong Kong? Okay, I guess we can go ahead and part with that. And there'll be some trade concessions, some favorable terms, okay. But when the British kept agitating for, when are you guys going to legalize opium? The Chinese made it very clear that there were two problems they had with it. First problem was economic, because they weren't looking to continue seeing money go out the door just for some doggone get high. But the second problem the Chinese made clear that they had with it was it's not good to have an entire nation of people strung out. So they were like, forget it, that's a deal breaker. Unless you want the hostilities to start up all over again, you need to knock it off with that legalizing the opium nonsense. You need to knock it off, which the Brits eventually did. Eventually. But something else that needs to be remembered. Part of the reason that the Chinese infantry, we already know that the British, they put all their eggs into a naval basket. That's where the old saying comes from, God save the Queen, but for her navy. Because the British because they're an island, they don't have the luxury of being able to trade land for time, which is the typical strategy that continental people use, whether it be the American Revolution or whether it be the Japanese invasion of China. When China was invaded by Japan, they traded land for time. When the Nazis invaded Russia, the Russians traded land for time. That's a typical tactic that continental people use. Because when you got a lot of land, you got that luxury. But when you are an island people, you don't have any land that you can trade for time. The enemy gets a foothold, you're done. So the British put all of their eggs into a naval basket. You have to be able to win your battles on the water because you can't trade land for time. So the Brits already had an advantage when it came to naval warfare. But the odds could have been evened up with the Chinese army if it wasn't for the fact that so much of the Chinese army was strung out on drugs. They were strung out on opium just like the civilians were. So you see, before hostilities had even begun, the British had already neutralized China's warrior class. Even if China's navy was not able to match the British navy, the Chinese infantry should have. They had superior numbers. But the problem was they also had superior inebriation too. See, the British didn't allow their troops to get strung out on heroin. They didn't allow their troops to get high on opium. They didn't have their troops smoking hashish or anything else. No, the British demanded that their soldiers be sober. The Chinese, on the other hand, hey, opium for everybody. Now, I want you to understand the idea of using drugs as a weapon. It's not a new idea. They've been doing it for hundreds of years. They did it in Europe. They did it in Ireland. They did it with the Native Americans. Hey, here's some firewater, Chief Running Mouth, or whatever your name is. Once you go ahead and get high, why don't you go ahead and sign on the dotted line? As soon as you have some more firewater first, of course. Look, there's a number of rather clever, if not outright devious, plots and plans that white supremacy has initiated against us. But when it comes to drugs, there is nothing clever about it at all. They're not even trying to hide it. This is obvious. It's out in the open. The same people who came up with the idea of the drug war, which was nothing more than a pretense for mass incarceration, the same people like Joe Biden, who co-sponsored the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which created the 100-to-1 sentencing disparity between crack cocaine and powder cocaine. The same Jim Crow Joe who wrote the '94 crime bill, which put draconian punishments in place for even having drugs. The same guys who have been using drugs as the very excuse to lock black folks up wholesale. Meanwhile, they've been making sure that drugs get into the black community in the first place. The same people weaponizing drugs and then weaponizing the possession of drugs through law against us. These are the same people saying, oh, well, maybe we'll legalize it and you got some Negroes out there getting happy. Unless you got black folks who are selling the drugs to other people, ain't a damn thing to be happy about. And you notice that they're making sure you don't get any of that. Oh yeah, the same way the Brits were fine with the idea of legalizing opium so long as they controlled the opium trade, long as they controlled the supply of it. If they control the supply of it, why legalize it? These guys are not running a new play, it's the same old play, 200 years old. There's absolutely nothing new about it. It's the exact same playbook that they used against the Chinese. And you want to know why the world they use against the Chinese and the Irish and the Native Americans and against us? You want to know why? Because they know that there's going to be a critical mass of people dumb enough to go for it. All of this excuse making for being stupid, all of this excuse making for being weak. What part does weakness have in black empowerment? What part does excuse-making have in black empowerment? Oh, I know this may sound harsh, but apparently, suffering under white supremacy, apparently that's not so harsh. Tells me a lot about where some of y'all's minds are at, if you think that my words are harsh. But when I say that we must be uncompromising, that's exactly what I mean. When I say that we must have a hard-nosed approach to our power, that's precisely what I mean. And while there have been some so-called legalization of marijuana in certain states, but you notice when it comes to black folks, they're still locking black folks up for having it anyway. Notice that. Oh, we legalized it in Colorado, but we're still going to lock the black folks up if they're caught having it. Oh, it's okay to use it, it's just not legal to have it. But in the last 4 to 5 years, at least since 2013, when all these killings of black folks started spilling over and the uprisings began, now they've gone from, oh, we're going to be legalizing it but locking up all you niggers to, you know what, we're just going to legalize it, period. You want to know why? Because white supremacy needs a way to get black folks to control themselves. If you can't control black folks, if they're starting to slowly but surely lose their fear or lose any doubts or trepidation or any sort of hesitance about taking on the enforcement arm of white supremacy, if they're losing their hesitation in the face of that, they're losing their qualms about taking on the enforcement arm, well, we need to find a way to undermine them. Domestic warfare, no different than what the Brits did against the Chinese. Flood these niggers with it, get them to become collaborators in their own oppression. Come on, folks. The white supremacist intentions couldn't possibly be clearer. Obviously, they're not going to give you freedom, but they will get you narcotized, because that's what this is. This is an attempt at mass narcotization. Get as many black folks as possible strung out. That's what this is about. Sure, there is the economic piece, obviously. White supremacy is nothing if not racism for fun and profit. That's how white supremacy perpetuates itself. They have to find ways to monetize their anti-black racism. You got to make sure that this thing pays for itself. The white supremacists in half a millennium have never done black folks even one damn favor. What makes you think that they're starting now? But here's where the thing gets deep. Even if white supremacy never existed, marijuana use, drug use of any sort, still wouldn't be okay. And you see, that's something that our people need to understand and something our people need to accept and digest and make part of their being. There are certain things that are wrong in and of themselves. You do not need white supremacy as some sort of excuse or some sort of rationalization for staying away from these vices. These things are bad in and of themselves. If white supremacy never existed, you calling yourself getting high, just surrendering your personal sovereignty, deciding that there's an acceptable amount of your soul that you can afford to surrender to addiction, that still wouldn't make it right. White supremacy is not the only reason why it's wrong. If white supremacy never existed, it would still be wrong to be doing that mess. This is a tough conversation for a lot of black folks because a lot of black folks have gotten comfortable with the idea to make excuses for doing the wrong thing. When you have one of these vices that you've chosen to indulge, you can no longer talk about focus. Because focus doesn't leave room for dilution. Focus doesn't leave room for diversion. So that's what I've got to say when it comes to black folks and marijuana use. Black people are thinking that it's cute to be trying to make all sorts of excuses for it, and it's not. I'll tell you right now, I have no problem if black people are going to be selling marijuana. If they legalize it, black folks should sell it. But I'll be damned if I'm going to be giving any sort of wink and a nod to black people using it. No, family. When it comes to this subject in particular, you can already tell the position I've staked out. Let the white supremacists and their collaborators lose their souls.